What I do, what I do, what I do, da da do, da da do. It don't mean a thing if it ain't got that swing. It don't mean a thing, all you got to do is sing. It makes no difference if it's sweet or hot. Just keep that rhythm, give it everything you got. It don't mean a thing if it ain't got that swing.
All right. Hey, everybody. Welcome to Joe's Records and Tapes. Let me know if you can hear me. We want to make sure that the audio is working. That's the first order of business. And if you can hear things, that's great. That was obviously Don't Mean a Thing If It Ain't Got That Swing, sung by Ivy Anderson. Ivy Anderson was one of the great singers for the Duke Ellington, thank you, great singers for the Duke Ellington Orchestra. And this particular album is all of her songs for them in the late 20s, early 30s. And it's kind of fabulous for the reason that the liner notes are very rare. I'll tell you why in a minute, but they were written by a woman, for one. Not many women jazz writers on these old LPs. Her name was Helen Oakley Dance. And her husband was Stanley Dance, a famous jazz writer who was very close to Duke Ellington. And she happens to be, weirdly, a lost historical figure, Helen Oakley Dance. You should remember that name. And the reason is because she is responsible for the first ever integrated jazz concert in American history in Chicago in the early 30s. She was a big jazz fan, became friends with Duke Ellington, but she arranged for Benny Goodman and some amazing African-American players to play with him, which was unheard of at the time. And so she's amazing. And Ivy Anderson is not, she's also sort of been lost to history, but she's probably the greatest singer who ever played with Duke Ellington. And that's what you were hearing a minute ago. Tonight, we are having Mercedes Ellington, Duke Ellington's granddaughter, right here on this little video screen here. She is an amazing person. I met her last summer when I was doing some research about Duke Ellington. I found out that she was living in the city. She's a fabulous dancer and performer, tap dancer, ballroom dancer, and she's kind of, only in New York kind of person that you meet. You're like, you're Duke Ellington's granddaughter? And she, of course, met and knew her grandfather and toured the Soviet Union with the Duke Ellington Orchestra in the early 70s. But even beyond all that, she danced on the Jackie Gleason Show. She was one of these, variety show singers with a whole troupe of singers. And she was the first African-American dancer to appear on the televised variety show. She sort of broke the color line in 1962. So she has a kind of great history of her own. And she remembers lots of cool things about her grandfather and the way the world was in the early 60s. And she's kind of fantastic. So, and it's not just, her being a dancer is important to the Duke Ellington story. Why is that? Because Duke Ellington started out playing at the Cotton Club as a kind of backup music for a floor show of dancers. And a lot of his music is informed by the feeling of dance. And in fact, I often say that his piano playing is very much the piano playing of a dancer, like his fingers are the dancers on the piano. And and that's what makes him a beautiful piano player. He's often not regarded as a piano player because you think of him as an orchestra leader. But in fact, he's a beautiful piano player. But one of the songs that he would play to backup dancers in the late 20s at the Cotton Club in Harlem was this tune, which he later recorded in the early 60s with Louis Armstrong. It's called Black and Tan Fantasy. See if I can get it. There we go. Dig this for a minute. That was the end of the last one. Is one of my favorite versions of the song Black and Tan Fantasy. That was Louis Armstrong. That was actually Duke Ellington sitting in with Louis Armstrong's band. And the clarinet player, Barney Bigard, you should file that name away. It's one of the great names of jazz history. But he first started out in Duke Ellington's band in the 20s and 30s and later becomes part of the Armstrong band. So he was the connective tissue between Armstrong and Ellington. And that's a song that he would play in the Cotton Club in the late 20s to these sort of elaborate floor shows. And you know, it has to be said that this was a very complicated scene, right? You're talking about an all-white club, the Cotton Club. And here's Duke Ellington with this great job running this sort of, backing this dance floor full of amazing dancers, all African Americans, but as a kind of like jungle room for these rich white people, and it's very complicated. But the beauty of Duke Ellington is he took this opportunity in this milieu and converted it into art, and he had allies in that. Like I mentioned, Helen Oakley Dance, she was an ally. She was a super fan who kind of like ended up going on tour with him in the early 30s. She was like a white, wealthy heiress from Toronto and sort of became obsessed with this music and became a fan, started a fan club, and as I said, arranged the first integrated jazz concert with Benny Goodman in Chicago, I believe, and so there's all kinds of interesting history and complicated history. Mercedes is coming on in a little while. Now, Duke Ellington was her grandfather. You know, these jazz guys had very itinerant lifestyles. They didn't always know their grandchildren that well. And he didn't know Mercedes, I don't believe, that well. He didn't even know his son maybe as well as he should have, and they had a complicated relationship. Lots of complications. You know, on the surface, all this beautiful art and all this beautiful music, and below the surface, humans, you know, with difficult lives and complicated lives, and the race thing being such a through line in the lives of the jazzmen. But one of my favorite books, and if I would say probably the dishiest of all the Duke Ellington books, was written by Mercedes' father. This is his book, Mercer Ellington's An Intimate Memoir. Duke Ellington in Person, an intimate memoir you know, about his life with his father. And I just want to read you one quick thing here because it's pretty amazing. He says, you know, certain incidents here may suggest that I at times hated Duke Ellington. The truth is, I did. This is best explained by quoting Bob Oudkoff, his good friend and mine, who once said, "Hate is such an luxurious emotion, it can only be spent on one we deeply love." I have tried to show the strengths and frailties of the real man behind the public image. Well, so, you know, you imagine growing up in the shadow of a genius, There's some amazing sort of scenes of him as a young boy hearing his father up in their apartment in Harlem, hearing his father composing in the middle of the night. Anyway, that legacy goes down to Mercedes, who's going to come on in a minute. I'm going to play one song, and then we're going to bring her on. And she's such a fabulous person. I can't wait to talk to her. But what I wanted to bring on is a song that she herself danced to on Broadway in the early 80s when her father put on a production called Sophisticated Ladies. And one of the songs she danced to was Duke Ellington's Dancers in Love, which is an awesome song because it has these finger snaps in it that are really beautiful. But also, it's on my personal favorite Duke Ellington record of all time, Piano Reflections. So if you're out there and you're thinking about what Duke Ellington should I listen to, I would say listen to this, because it's without the orchestra, stripped down, direct relationship and conference with Duke Ellington himself, just on the piano, with a bass and a drum behind him. But it's so pure and beautiful, and it's soulful and swinging and melancholy, and it's really the most intimate, I think, of the Duke Ellington albums. Recorded in 1953 when his career was at a low ebb and the big band era had ended and he was sort of alone in this room, and it's just, there's a real feeling to it. This is probably one of the more up-tempo tunes on it. We can think about his granddaughter dancing to this years later. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Sorry, I got to find, vinyl. You got to find where you're going to land the needle. You pray that you can get it right. Let's see if I can do it. Oh boy. Here we go. Third time's a try. Third time's a try. A try. Man, that was perfection. Beautiful. Such a great vibe. So, I'm going to bring her on now. Hold your horses. I'm going to put on my headphones here so I can hear her in my elaborate and ridiculous technical setup here. Hold on a second. Here we go. I did her in. She will be coming in here shortly. Hi.
Joe!
Hello. Welcome. Oh,
Here
man.
she is, ladies and gentlemen.
Ladies and gentlemen, hi. And Michael, her producer. Got to have you on hand.
Yes.
On hand
Yes.
for that. Thank you for
Man with
coming
the
on.
camera.
Oh man,
Yes.
you look fabulous tonight, as you promised you would. I love it. I love it.
Thanks for the chat earlier today, Joe. Everything went great.
Good. I'm glad.
Talk to you later.
Thank you. Thank you very much. There was Dancers in Love.
Yes, we were snapping. We were snapping.
Yeah. Did you snap when you performed that on Broadway?
No, actually, it was the band. The band did the snaps, and we were so busy dancing. It was Hinton Battle, Greg Burge, and myself. And that is where I got my first knee replacement injury.
Oh, wow. So, so you really, you put in some personal physical sacrifice for your grandfather and father.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Because your father was he the producer of it, or he was conducting, right?
He was conducting. He was on, and it was one of, if it wasn't the first, it was one of the first musicals that had the live band on stage rather than in the pit.
Right. Wow. Yeah. Well, that you'd want
we were
that.
like back to back sometimes, you know.
Right. And were they in the traditional sort of like matching Ellingtonian outfits?
Yes. Absolutely. Yeah. Yep, they were, and they were well lit, and it was great because I got to know where he was, and he got to know where I was every night. You know that it's 10 o'clock. Do you know where your child is?
Right.
So, and we would, and before Cottontail, I would peek out of the wings and see where his head was, and if his ears were back, I knew that we were in for a rapid tempo.
Yeah.
And just with your loins, you know.
Yeah, yeah. So I have a question. You know, I was talking earlier about, you know, the Cotton Club, and there were these, you know, dance floor shows that the original Ellington band helped drive, and they were so a part of that, you know. Did you end up ever knowing any of the original Cotton Club dancers, you know, in your own life? Did you ever meet any?
Yes, I met a couple of them. They later organized themselves as a group called the Silver Bells.
Oh wow!
And besides the Silver Bells, and they kept dancing, and they would show us routines that they actually did, which was, there's one routine was called trickeration.
Wow.
And I remember I could not learn it to save my soul. It was very, you know, complicated, but they just fell into it and they started doing it, and they would rehearse, you know. And of course, there was the special lady in my grandfather's life, Freddie Washington.
Right.
And yes, and she wasn't dancing anymore, but she was a great friend of Bobby Short. And I met her through Bobby. What? And we mentioned the fact that she was almost my grandmother.
Yeah.
But my grandfather actually never did divorce his wife, his first wife, which is my father's mother. So he had many, you know, tour de forces of the feminine variety, but he, you know, never, I guess it was a protection. Maybe that was it. I don't know.
Right. Well, and, you know, so much of his music there were muses in his life, right? Romances. Yes. And, you know, as I read in the recent biography I read was, you know, Warm Valley was not like about a place in, you know, that you could find on a map. So you didn't, you know, you grew up with your mother, right? Or your,
yes.
Yeah.
My mother's mother, who was from the West Indies, Kingston, Jamaica, she raised me.
Wow.
And we started Uptown. I don't have very many memories of the Uptown apartment, but we were near where Ellington had a huge apartment, either Edgecombe Avenue, St. Nicholas Avenue. In those days, the apartment buildings had large apartments, like 9-room apartments. And I remember there was a point where when Billy Strayhorn came from Pittsburgh, he lived with them, and my father lived with them. And so there was room for people to live there. And my father continued this tradition until in his life, when he was living on Broadway and 62nd Street, and some of the band members used to stay overnight with him or whatever until they had the next gig, and then they would, you know, go on the next gig and go home. But if they had gigs back to back, you know, they would stay at and he would cook. and his favorite thing to cook was turkey stew.
Oh, wow.
Of course, you'd have to have the turkey first, you know, but then he would make the turkey stew, and then the guys would come over. And it was a big party.
It sounds like it's like a jazz commune, right?
Yes, absolutely, yeah.
And of course, your father was like around a lot of the time, yeah, right? I mean,
Yes.
observing all of this and wanting to be in on it. Obviously, he did. I mean, he was in on it.
Yeah, oh, well, I think that originally my grandfather let him wander a little bit on his own, and he organized a couple of bands and some choruses, some choirs and things like that. But then it occurred to my grandfather that he needed somebody with him whom he could trust, because he was getting built. People were robbing him blind. There was nobody to take account. And my father was a great mathematician. He wanted to be an engineer, and he was a great mathematician, and he could just, you know, fix the books and figure out everything very simply. And so my grandfather said, you know, you're coming with me. And my father just also happened to be a trumpet player. So he became a trumpet player in the band, and then took care of the books.
Right. Wow. And I assume you've read this book.
Not the entire thing. I've read portions of it.
Right. It's saucy, as they say. You know,
Yes.
it's,
Yes.
but we're going to return to that in a minute. But let's talk for a minute about, you know, you grew up, you became a dancer. You got interested in dance. You went to Juilliard.
Yes.
And you got interested in Broadway. And, you know, obviously the entertainment and the arts were in your family. But tell us a little bit about, I was just thinking about this the other day. I saw Smokey and the Bandit, okay? This movie has Jackie Gleason in it. And Jackie Gleason plays a Southern sheriff, right? But then I was thinking, well, but it occurred to me, he I don't know how much he was responsible for this, but he brought you onto the show to be a dancer, and you were one of the first, if not the first, African-American woman dancer to be seen by American television audiences in these variety shows, right? Tell me a little bit about how that happened.
Well, I used to audition for everything, and at that time there were not that many opportunities for people of color on Broadway or in different shows. I mean, after Juilliard, when I first graduated, I went to Australia and did West Side Story for 7 months. Wow. And I was happy to get the job, but West Side Story seemed to be the way that people would fit in, that you could sneak a few people of color in, and they would be Spanish, you know, or something. And so I did West Side Story for many years in the summer tents and things. And then the next biggest event in my life, of course, was becoming a June Taylor dancer. And I met June Taylor when I was working at a place called Jones Beach Marine Theater. And in the summertime, they used to do big shows out there. And I was a June Taylor dancer, and the shows, they would hire a singing chorus and a dancing chorus. I mean, it was huge. There was a regular main stage. There was pontoons that would connected the main stage to the fore stage, and then the audience. I mean, it was just large. And of course, we prayed for rain, because the only time we had off was if it rained. So that's when I first came across June. And then somebody called me up one year and said, why don't you audition for the Jackie Gleason Show? And I said, why should I? I know that there are no people of color on that show. And one of the brave ones who used to audition for everything was a woman named Altavice Gore, and she was Sammy Davis Jr.'s wife. And she would just be very optimistic and audition for everything. And the thing about it, you would go to these auditions, and they would be in the form of a free jazz class, because you just take the audition, you know, and you may know that you're not going to get the job, but at least you'd have the exercise to be like a class for yourself. And then when you're eliminated, which was the ultimate result, you'd go out with your friends, you'd have coffee. So we were like the coffee clutch club, you know. We go for coffee and exchange all the news, and look forward to seeing us. Well, see you later. See you at the next audition, you know. And that's how we got. And sometimes we were hired, but most times we were not. I'm going to get all over the place, but I just
okay.
get back to when I auditioned for June for the Jackie Gleason Show. It was like a very odd time because I'd known her from Jones Beach, but I went through the audition and I, didn't make any. I knew that I was not going to get the job, so towards the end, I got a little nervous because I noticed that a lot of the people who had begun the audition were disappearing. And I turned around and I was standing in a line. They asked us to stand in a line. And I noticed that there were 17 people in the line. And then there was a big flurry of activity at the front desk. And Gleason came in, and Jack Philbin and some of the producers and the directors, they all came in, sat at the desk. And Gleason and June put their heads together. And then she turned to all of us and she said, "You are the June Taylor dancers," and which included one swing, so the 16 June Taylor dancers and a swing. And I almost fainted, except I thought she made a mistake. I'm looking and I'm saying, oh, she just forgot that I was here and she's going to come and tell me to leave. But then she did come and tell me. She took me aside and she said, look, there's going to be a lot of talk about this, because after she had announced it, lots of news people came in and started taking pictures, and she said, I don't care how much news there results from this, your choice, you being here, because if you don't live up to the work, I will fire you. And there was, she said, she promised that everybody knew that every week she would fire people. That was the way she was. And so I put the fear of God into me, and I would go afterwards and take tap classes, because that was kind of my weak spot. So after every rehearsal, I would go and take tap classes. But we were only a year. The year that I was hired was the year that Kennedy was assassinated. And after that, Gleason decided to go to Miami Beach because of his love of golf. And he built a rehearsal hall on the golf course. And so we danced with everything. We danced with golf clubs. We danced with tennis rackets, with ladders, when Liberace was on, we did toy pianos. We played banjos. We played xylophones. We danced a precision dance number with 10 speed bites. I mean, my heart was in my mouth half the time. Sudden death was going to happen. And yet, I said, I got this job. And it was amazing because the TV seasons at that time were long, and it was long enough for me to say, well, I was a full-time working person all year round, because after the show was over, I had enough weeks for unemployment to take me to the next show. The only little glitch was when Gleason decided to move from New York to Miami. He took the train because he didn't like flying, and it started from the beautiful, now they've torn it down, Penn Station, and it was the banner on the outside of the train read "The Great Gleason Express." And we took the train from New York down to Miami Beach with a pit stop, I think in Georgia, Alabama. I can't even remember the state. And I had great qualms about going through the South. I said, just let us get through the South to Miami Beach. And I know that, many New Yorkers had moved to Miami Beach, but we went, and he insisted on a pit stop because Steve Lawrence was on the show, on the train, singing, and Jilly's catered the train, and it was like a big party from one city to the next. And we got off for a PR opportunities in one of those states, and he wanted everybody to come out on the platform to wave, to the people and everything. I did not want to come out because I'm having visions of strange fruit hanging from the tree.
Yeah.
And so I'm staying in the back, lurking in the back with big sunglasses and a big hat, And all of a sudden, somebody from the back of the crowd yells out, "What's that colored girl doing up there?" And so that I said, "Oh God, this is it. You know, it's over." And Gleason reached his arm out and pulled me under his armpit, and he said, "You stay right here."
Wow.
And from that time on, I think he had somebody looking out for me, you know, but it was kind of hairy, and I didn't want to think about it. You know, there are things that I didn't want to think about. That was one incident, and the fact that I had the nerve to go and do all of these other really very dangerous things. We did a number where we had a duplicate of the public library steps. We had a precision number that we did up and down the steps, and we were not supposed to look down. But I cheated, and I had a wig that I tilted so it looked like I was okay, but I was really looking down, and you know.
So, how would you, just out of curiosity, was Jackie Gleason, I mean, you probably didn't get to know him that well, but was he, it seems like you're saying from that story that he was relatively progressive about this. I mean, and maybe
Yes.
and he was a music fan. I mean,
Yes, he was a great music. He was a composer. He didn't know how to write music, but he composed Melancholy Serenade. And actually, he and Ellington were supposed to do an opera together.
What?
Yes. And he had a big band show where he invited all the big bands, the Dorseys, Basie, everybody. I remember going to the airport to meet my father and seeing all the instruments on the turntable coming around. And it was an incredible show, and the guys got together, and they never met each other in real time because they were all working at different places, but they had a chance to there was a lot of camaraderie going on, and Gleason was in seventh heaven,
Yeah, right, of course.
Yeah.
So tell me up until I know that, you didn't maybe have a real close, intimate relationship with Duke Ellington, but he, acknowledged your existence and brought you, and you met him a few times and toured with him in Russia in 1971. Isn't that right?
Yes.
And that had to be what precipitated that, and what, I want to get into that story, but how did it come to pass that you were invited in? I mean, was Mercer at the time, your father, in the band, right? He was helping arrange and do stuff, right?
Yes. The story about Russia was that I was in a show called No No Nanette at the time, and I heard that they were going to Russia. And because my early aspirations to become a dancer centered around being a ballerina, and of course there were no people of color in the ballet world at that time except for Arthur Mitchell. But so I was really interested in ballet, and I said, well, this would give me a bird's eye view of the home of the ballet. And I did everything I could to arrange passage with them. They were on a 5-week State Department tour, which included Moscow, Minsk, Rostov-on-Don, Kiev, and what was then Leningrad. So I got on the plane I got my own passport and arranged passage. And I knew, that I would only be with them for 2 weeks, but we all went to Russia, and it was one of the most astounding places. It was like we got transported to the moon or something. It was like being at another country. I've never experienced it because everything was so stark, and except for the musicians. When we landed in Moscow, the people broke away from the police guards and were running alongside the plane when the plane was taxiing into the hangar. And the people knew about Duke Ellington and say, well, it was so isolated. How did they know? It was Radio Free America that when they heard the music. And we even found musicians, jazz musicians in Russia who had their favorite artists, and they played. Somebody played with Johnny Hodges style. Somebody, played with Cat Anderson or they would pick each person and emulate them and try to latch onto that style of jazz. And there were some great jazz musicians in Russia.
Yeah.
But there was another strange, there was another strange thing that happened because Duke Ellington always used to play the piano, and he'd have a glass of Coca-Cola on the piano, and he'd put sugar in it. And I guess it was his kind of vitamin B, you know. So one of the promoters of the band and a close friend, she was also a close friend of Louis Armstrong, Phoebe Jacobs. Phoebe Jacobs, she called up Coca-Cola to see if they could arrange to send cartons of Coca-Cola with us to Russia. And they never answered her. So she called up Joan Crawford, who was married to Pepsi-Cola. And she said, don't show him the can. Maybe he won't know the difference. So we went, and Pepsi-Cola traveled with us. And in turn, Pepsi-Cola got the contract to bring back Stolichnaya. So Stolichnaya became the first Russian vodka in America, and Pepsi-Cola was the first American soft drink in Russia.
Wow. Wow. And Duke Ellington was sort of helped make that marriage possible.
Yes.
That's amazing. So tell me, like, you know, you'd probably seen the Duke Ellington Orchestra before this, right? I mean, you'd...
Yes, and at the Apollo.
Yeah. And did you know any of the band members until then?
Yes, I mean they were always very friendly. They called me the dancer, you know.
Yeah.
And they were very respectful, and they were curious because I was a member of the family, but I was also in the business, so I understood what it was like to be around musicians and what, you know. And there were also some funny stories that happened on the tour bus in Russia. They wanted to keep us busy all the time, so they took us on tours. We went to the Hermitage and everything. And on one of these tours, Cootie Williams started talking about Catherine the Great in the barn with the animals. And everybody was aghast, and the musicians were hysterical, but he was doing it because two of the tourist guides, these two Russian ladies, were with us. And he wanted to get a rise out of them. So he continued to embellish the story and talk loudly and everything. And finally, one of them shot up out of her seat, and she said to him, "There's more to Russia than Catherine the Great," you know, which that's what he wanted. He just got hysterical.
Now, during this period, these guys, well, let me ask you really just a real basic question here. What was, you know, people have asked you this a million times, I'm sure, but what was Duke Ellington like to be around? He must have had a special regard for you. I mean, you're his family. He knows that. Yeah. What was he, I mean, we know him as sort of, he's debonair, he's funny, he's a little bit ironic, you know, but he was difficult to know, even for his own son, and right? I mean, you were in your 20s, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so what was he like? I mean, what was your response to him at the time?
Well, I mean, it was sort of an uncomfortable relationship, and I was talked to my grandfather through my father. For instance, my grandfather would give presents to his grandchildren and he would like to know what their interests were before. So when I talked to him, he would say, "Oh, what did I give you? You know, what did you enjoy what I gave you for Christmas?" And in that time, that was the time that he found out what he had given me, because someone else had arranged, you know. I remember getting a typewriter one year, and I said, "Oh, that was a great typewriter that you gave me." And he said, "Oh, I'm glad you enjoyed it." I still have it, actually.
Yeah, wow.
And he was, I think he felt at ease around me because he knew that I was interested in being a dancer. And he also suggested that I go to Europe to continue my career. He said, "You're not going to get far here as a dancer, so you should go to Europe," because his friend Josephine Baker, that's what she did. She was here, but she made herself famous by being a dancer in Europe. And I guess he didn't really hook into the different types of dancing that there was. And since I wanted to be on Broadway, it was a chorus dancer. And he came to see No No Nanette, by the way. And he was late, and I remember it was the second act, and I looked down the aisle, and there he was with his sister, my great aunt Ruth, looking for a seat. They had to get a special seat for him because the house was full. But so he saw me perform, and I saw him perform, and it was great because we got his favorite thing was eating.
Right.
And
he's famous for that. Yeah.
Yes. Steaks.
Right.
Was his most favorite. Actually, they sent steaks also with us to Russia, but they were mysteriously burned at the border.
Oh, that's weird.
Yeah, that was a story that was given to us, that they didn't find them suitable to the food categories or whatever, and so they had to burn them.
Right. That's very odd. So you've told me that when you were touring in Russia, the bands had a kind of these guys were in their 60s and 70s. They'd been together since the 20s, right? I mean, They must have seemed pretty, daunting to you to some degree. I mean, they're like these older, wise guys who've been around for a long time, and they had a camaraderie with each other and kind of complicated histories and everything else. How were you kind of aware of what was going on with all of the band, and can you tell us a little bit about what it was like to hang out with them?
Well, I like to hang out, and I love to hear them play, and that was the thing that got us, kind of broke down the barriers, because the age difference, they didn't know how to relate. Many of them didn't have children, or they had younger children, or different age ranges, and they weren't basically family men, so their family was themselves. And so when I was with them, I was included in that family. And it was very, it was a shifting kind of situation, because I didn't tour with them that much. And but when I did, they made a special effort to make me comfortable around them.
Right. Yeah. And do you remember, one of the things that I loved talking to you about is you are so up on the history. I mean, you absorbed it through the years, and partly it was probably through people that knew your grandfather and friends of your father and people, maybe some books, I don't know. But did you know, for instance, Stanley Dance and Helen Oakley Dance, who I was mentioning earlier?
Yes, I knew. They were great friends, fabulous friends. Yes. Right.
They were probably, they were very close to Duke, and they helped co-write his book, his memoir, Music is My Mistress, and your father's book. And so that's how kind of tied up they were with the Ellington story. And really, any record for you listening out there, any records you find from the 50s or 60s, 90% chances the liner notes were written by Stanley Dance, right? Yeah. And the interesting thing that I've learned is that Helen knew Duke before Stanley. His wife had met Duke and the band in the early 30s when she was just a young jazz fan and hung out with them and stuff. And now tell me a little bit about, in the last year, you've been producing Ellington-themed shows at Birdland. You did one about the Sacred Concert, and you integrate dancing into it. Obviously, that's your forte. Yeah. And
because the things at Birdland is not, and nightclubs are not that conducive to the dance element. And I wanted to produce like a sampler, a mini show, so that it would include dancing as well as musicians and singers. And so I decided to tackle the Nutcracker in last November, which was a real weird experience. And the band that played was Bobby Sanabria, and he had 21 musicians in Birdland on the stage, which doesn't really leave much room for anything else.
Yeah.
But we found a way in a few spaces, and since we were doing the Nutcracker, I hired a belly dancer to do the arabesque cookie. And she found a space in front of the saxophone section, and the saxophone section had a hard time keeping their focus on the music. So it was little inserts like that. And then the chinoiserie, we had 3 ballroom dancers, and they did dances with fans and things. And their fans were, I think they were in front of they may have been in front of the trombone section. And so the slides were having to come out in between their fan movements. But it was, it worked out very well, and everybody was very appreciative. And we did a second line through the audience before the show started. So we were followed by musicians, and it was very audience friendly. They felt much more a part of it, and it was unusual. So we had a great time. It was very very well received, and so we've tried to that's right. I was so delighted to see your LPs, because I have LPs, and the collection that I have, I picked out maybe about 8 or 10 to do at Birdland. I mean, we did the sacred music at Birdland. We did the Nutcracker. We did Ellington on Broadway, which was a combination of things from Sophisticated Ladies and Play On and Jump for Joy. And now the next one that we were going to do before this pandemic hit was Such Sweet Thunder.
Oh, which is one of my favorites, and which is based on Shakespeare, and he wrote different songs for different characters and different plays, and it's one of my favorite records from the late 50s. Yes. People should look it up. We're going to be having to cut short here in about 5 minutes, but I just want to wind it down. But I just, one of the things that I learned about you, and you and I were making a plan last we talked about taking a tour of Greenwood Cemetery. Is that right?
Woodlawn.
Woodlawn, sorry. And because you're associated with Woodlawn, and a lot of Duke Ellington and a lot of his bands are buried there, right?
Yes, they are.
And, how did you, I just wonder, as the granddaughter, you didn't have, you're a dancer by trade, but you didn't have to take up the legacy of your grandfather, but you have. And
because there was a lot of things, like I'm telling this story about Russia. Where are you going to find that story?
Right.
I mean, I could tell you another story about Barney Bigard, but that's,
Yeah, tell me. Tell me. I played him earlier. I played him with when he was playing with Louis Armstrong on that record. So, tell me about him.
Yeah, quite a character. But these guys are characters. These musicians are incredible. I mean, buried across the aisle from Ellington and the group is Miles Davis.
Wow.
And Miles Davis is a beautiful black marble slab, and when they first buried him, there was a beautiful tree. And the tree died.
Oh, no.
And so they replaced the tree, built another, planted another tree. And that tree, Miles killed that tree too, Then they decided to plant some bushes. And next thing I knew, there was moss. The bushes had disappeared. And so now that's what's there is moss. So we're going to see what happens.
That's kind of, there's a lot of poetry there.
Yes.
Lastly, maybe just say this. First of all, thank you so much for agreeing to do this. I hope that when this pandemic stuff winds down, we're going to get together in person and talk, and that will be so wonderful, and continue our conversation, because I love it so much, and I value just your memories, and everything that is so valuable in this music. It seems old now. Not everybody, some people have a hard time thinking about how they can wrap their arms around Duke Ellington. There's just so much music there. It's there's a lot of academic talk about it, but at the end of the day, it's very direct, visceral music that has swing to it, and it's about all the things of humanity. It's about love and melancholy and tragedy and joy, and it's also about, in the subtext of a lot of it is freedom, right? Yeah. And we are in this era where we're talking about Black Lives Matter, and there's this long history that came before this that is so important. I mean, he was a pioneer. I was thinking, and I'm not going to babble too long, but Joe Jones, the great drummer, he said the newspapers would ask him, they would ask Ellington, what about Black Power? And he goes, you know what do you mean? Black and Tan Fantasy, Creole Love Call. I wrote the songs in the late 20s. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
He was writing about the beauty of Black is Beautiful well before, decades before it was popular, and bringing it and making it into art. And
yes, and people would ask him about his people, and he said his people are the people.
That's right. And he wrote music for humans, for humanity.
Yes.
And he's a true artist of the world. And to me, he's an inspiration, especially in these times. And people should go back and study and think about Ellington, but just also enjoy it. And
yes,
your coming on here has been such a deep pleasure, and let's do it again. Okay. Thank you, Mercedes Ellington. I really am grateful that you came on, and God bless and stay gold.
Yes, you too, and we'll see you soon.
Okay, take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.